everybody, welcome back to the Kimberbell Let It Snow Pillow video series. We are on part 3 today. Let me show you what we're going to be working on. Today we're going to make the Snowball Blocks, Pinwheel 1 and Pinwheel 2, the Snowman Dimensional Arms, and the Lace Snowflakes. Going to talk about a couple of things for all of these before we get started. The Snowball Block is a pieced block. We're going to piece this block in the hoop and then do the quilting. I'm going to do all of these at once in one hooping. I can fit them in an 8x12 hoop. I'll show you how to do that. And I'm going to be using my silver thread. I've shown it before. It's PF4321. If you're using the Floriani threads, it's already on my machine. When we get to the pinwheel blocks, these are also pieced first and then quilted. These are pieced in halves. I'm going to do both of them at the same time. I'll show you how to duplicate in your hoop and do that. We'll piece the halves, sew them together, then rehoop for the quilting. I believe I can also fit this one in my 8x12 hoop. If it doesn't fit in the 8x12, I have to use a 9.5x14. We'll find out when we get these set up in the machine. For the Snowman Dimensional Arms, you need some wash-away stabilizer. I showed this last time. This one I'll be doing in a 5x7 hoop. You can do it in a 4x4 hoop if you have one. I just do not have that size for my machine. And our lace snowflakes are also going to use the wash-away stabilizer. There's a note in here to use a 70-10 embroidery needle, not a universal needle. Well, guess what I have? A 7511 needle. I think that's a universal needle, but it's a 7511 made for an embroidery machine. I'm going to be using that today because I don't have a 70-10. We'll see how it turns out. This one actually uses 2 layers of the wash-away stabilizer, and I'll be working on all 3 at once. I've got all my threads ready. They're in my Kimberbell leather snap tray. I have a video on how to embroider on the snap trays, and this design that's in the bottom is a free design. I'll link that video below for you. All my fabrics cut according to the instructions. Let's go over our batting sizes. We're going to make 4 snowball blocks. I've cut my batting at 3.5 inches square. Both Pinwheel 1 and Pinwheel 2 have a 5.5 inch square piece of batting, and there's no batting for the Snowman Dimensional Arms. It's just the felt. I'm using Kimberbell's gingerbread felt for this, and unless we're using the wash away, we're going to be using the light mesh cutaway stabilizer. I actually ran out of the roll size. I have these pre-cut 10x12. I don't think they make these anymore. I'll link it below if it's available. My backup stabilizer, this is called a no-show mesh medium weight. It's made by HBI is how you find it. I found it on Amazon. It's very similar in weight to the Kimberbell stabilizer. Here's your Kimberbell stabilizer. Here's the no-show mesh. They feel very similar. The biggest difference between the two, if you use this HBI stabilizer, you can't put a hot iron on this. The stabilizer will melt. When I'm pressing seams open, if I'm using the Kimberbell stabilizer and my iron hits the stabilizer, I haven't had a problem. But with the HBI, if my iron is on the high setting, it will melt. Anything I'm doing in the larger hoops for the rest of this project, I'm going to be using this HBI stabilizer since I'm out of the large size of the Kimberbell. I have to order some more. We're going to work on the snowball blocks. We want to piece it and then quilt it. However, if we load the file for the snowball block, what happens is it stitches a piecing template and then it moves right into piecing the block, and we don't have an opportunity to tack down the batting. Let me show you that. I want to do this all in one hooping. I don't want to make the block, take it out, and then rehoop and do the quilting. So here's your pieced block. Let's pretend we're just making one. The first thing that stitches is that piecing template. So that stitches right on your stabilizer. And then it moves right into the first, what's called a trimming and placement line. There's no opportunity here to tack down the batting. So we want to load our quilting file first. We'll tack down and trim our batting, skip the quilting and do the piecing, and then go back and do the quilting. It's not that hard. I'll show you how to do that. Let's start by loading the background quilting file. We want KDQ 492 Winter 12 2x2 horizontal. The horizontal is this one here with the center pointing up and down. And I want 4 of these because we're going to do them all at the same time. I'm going to hit edit. I'm going to use the border duplicate. I've talked about duplicating things before. I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm actually going to duplicate this off to the side to side, add 1. We need some space. That looks pretty good. And now let's add another row up and down underneath. Add some space. I'm going to move everything over a little bit, try and get it a little more centered. That looks good. So we have our quilting files. Now we need to add the pieced block file. I'm going to hit add. We'll go back and we're going to pull the pieced block file, and we have to line them up on top of the quilting file. See how it's right there? That's not where you want it. We need them on top of the quilting files. I'm going to drag and drop it and get it close to where it needs to be. Pretty close, but you can kind of see how it's got a blurry looking outline. You can use edit, move, and use these arrows and get it lined up. What will happen is the block outlines look like that. They look like they almost disappear. It looks like one block. The outlines sort of blend together. That's how you know you have it in the right spot. Let's duplicate. I'm going to add it to the right. Do you see where I put it? Now, if I hit this, see how that one moved too? So I want to use this button for spacing, and that's just going to move this one here on the right. That looks good. Now we're ready to add the two underneath. So up and down, add. If you use these, the whole thing shifts. So we want to use the little spacing arrows. If you go too far, you just bring it back closer together. That looks good. Let me zoom in on that. See how all of the outside lines are all lined up together? It looks like one complete unit. I'm going to hit OK, save it to your machine. If something happens, it would be really hard to center that again. We're ready to go. I'm going to hit embroidery. We're going to go through the batting placement and the batting tack down, and we'll trim our batting, and then we're going to skip forward to the piecing template. I'll show you how to do that. We're going to start with the batting placement lines. If you look close, you'll see there's the beginning of a piecing template here. I started to stitch this out and then realized that that wouldn't work, that I had to load the quilting file first. I can stitch over that. It's not a big deal. We're going to stitch out 4 batting placement lines. You want to grab your batting, make sure to cover the placement lines, then we're going to tack it down. I do have tape on my pieces of batting just in case. You want to trim everything that's outside of the tack down line. I've got all those little squares trimmed. We need to advance our design. You'll see the next thing on your machine is a fabric placement, then a fabric tack down, and the green down here is going to be the background quilting. We want to skip over all of that. So needle minus plus, going to use the arrows at the top, which will advance it a whole step. We don't need that one. And see how it's going between each one because it's doing everything 4 times. So that was the fabric placement. This is the fabric tack down. And then we'll advance through the quilting. When you see this picture up here, the little square with the little snowball lines, you're in the right spot. That's called the piecing template. We're going to stitch that out. It's going to stitch 4 of them. Once your piecing templates have stitched, you want to grab your piece 1 fabric. I'm using white flannel for mine. We want to place that right side up, centered over section 1. Section 1 is the center of the block, so pretty much just cover the block. I'm going to go ahead and tape that. I have to place all 4. Once you have your piece 1 fabrics placed, we're going to stitch out the first trimming and placement line. It's going to go up across the top corner. Next, you want to trim off the little corners. Now we're going to start building the snowflake. We're going to do this for each of the 4 corners. You'll take your piece 2 fabric right side down, center it along the trimming and placement line. I'm using flannel. I don't think this fabric is going to move. I'm going to see what happens if I don't tape this. Once you've got all these in place, remember right side down, we're going to stitch the seam. To flip and press these, you can do them here at the machine, or you can take them and press them at your iron. I'm going to wait until the end where we have them all flipped, and then I'll press them at the iron before we do the outline stitch. This is a clover seam roller, just a little plastic roller, or you can just use fingernails, which I've done several times before, but I think it makes a scratching noise on the video, so I'm sorry if it does that. I think I'm actually going to add a little tiny piece of tape just to make sure they stay flat. Those are all pressed and taped. We're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. We want to trim away the outside corner just like before. You might have seen my presser foot get caught on this. This piece is slightly overlapping on that block, so I'm going to cut off the little tiny corner there and maybe a little tiny corner on this one just in case. Piece 2 fabric, same thing, right side down, center it along that stitch line, and then you'll stitch the seam. That was piece 2. Going to do the same thing we did before. Flip it, press it. If you want to add that little piece of tape or take it over to your iron, you can do that. And then we're going to move on and do the same thing for pieces 3 and 4. I'm ready to stitch the next trimming and placement line. Trim off the corners, get your piece 3 fabric, place that right side down, and we'll stitch the seam. Same thing as before, press these, tape them if you need to, and then we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. A couple pieces of fabric are overlapping onto this block. We're going to be stitching a line going this direction. This might get caught and this might get caught, so I'm going to trim those off before I stitch the last trimming and placement line. Trim off the corner, place your piece 4 fabric, and we'll stitch the seam. This needs to be flipped and pressed. Before I do the next step, which is going to be a final outline, I'm going to take off all the little pieces of tape, and then I'm going to flip these over, and I'm going to give this a good press over at the iron. These are all pressed nice and flat. Next, we're going to stitch the final tack down line. If you're overlapping, make sure you've trimmed all your overlaps. I would recommend sitting and watching your machine. Since nothing is taped down, it is pressed. There's a chance something might flip up and then your block would be messed up. You'd have to do another one. So watch it as it stitches this final tack down. We've got everything tacked down. We're ready to move to our quilting. Let's go over to the display on our machine. You'll see it has these weird little corner lines. It says in the instructions don't stitch these, that they're for alignment purposes. We want to go to our needle minus plus, and we need to get to our background quilting. I'm just going to move forward. Now we're back to where we started. We've got the batting placement, batting tack down, fabric placement, fabric tack down, then the quilting. So just move forward until you see your background quilting. That's what I want to see. Let's do our background quilting. These are all done. The silver quilting looks fabulous on the white flannel. Let's go ahead and trim these now. Usually I do all the trimming at the end, but we have a lot to do today. I've got my blocks out of the hoop. I've got some nice big pieces of stabilizer on the top and on the bottom. I want to save those so I can use them for another project. Since we're trimming these to 2.5 inches square, there is no orange pop ruler. We are going to trim right on that trimming line. I'm going to line up my ruler along that trimming line for this block and this block. Make sure it's nice and straight, and then cut so I can maximize this piece of stabilizer. I think that piece may even fit in a 5x7 hoop, so I definitely want to save that. I'm going to trim the bottom and then the sides. I've got the top and bottom trimmed. I'm going to trim the sides next. I can use a straight line on my ruler to line up where I already trimmed on top, because I know that that line is straight, and make sure that's straight, and then line up against this trimming line here. I have the final 2 lines. I grabbed a smaller ruler. I'm going to line up across the top and along the side, and I'm going to check here, 2.5. Let's fix that. Make sure I'm 2.5 inches square. 2.5, 2.5, lined up across the top. You kind of have to press down a little hard because we did the quilting and there's batting, and on my blocks there's also flannel, so I have to press down a little bit hard. Now I know that's 2.5 inches square. I'm going to do the same thing. These are all done. I'm going to go ahead and set these aside. We're going to start on our pinwheel blocks. Let's start on our pinwheel blocks. In order to fit 2 of these into one hoop, I actually have to rotate the block. For this one, we do have to make the block first and then sew it together. They make it in 2 halves, and then do the quilting after that. I'm going to set one block in my hoop. If I just move this up and I add another one, it does fit but they're right on top of each other. So instead of doing that, I'm going to rotate this block 90 degrees. Now I'm going to add the second block, give it some space, and I think even if I bring them to the center, yes, the only hoop that's available for me is my big hoop, which is 9.5 by 14. So I might as well take advantage of all the space in my hoop. We're ready to go. I am going to go ahead and save it to my machine just in case. I have my light mesh cutaway stabilizer loaded. The first thing that's going to stitch out right on the stabilizer is the piecing template. I still have my silver thread on my machine. I'm going to leave that on throughout. We're on page 27 of the instructions. You might want to have this handy. This has everything mapped out, but remember I rotated my blocks and I rotated them this way. So if you haven't rotated your block, where you're placing your fabric is going to be different than where I'm placing my fabric. My number 1 will be here, and if you're doing it in the 5x7 hoop as it sets up normally in the hoop, your number 1 will be there. So make sure you have this handy. I'm going to set this on my little stand like that so I don't mess up. Since my design is rotated, my number 1 is this triangle up here. We're going to cover section 1. It says place the piece 1 fabric right side up centered over section 1. So for me, that triangle is right there. And then let me grab the top one. My odd numbered fabrics are all going to be the same. They're going to be this white fabric. We're going to stitch out the trimming and placement line. We're going to be trimming off that part and this part. I decided to trim off the little extra bits overlapping the other half of the pinwheel block, but you actually don't have to do that at this point. The blocks are made in halves, and we have the opportunity between the first half and the second half to trim away anything extra that overlaps. We need to get our piece 2 fabric. I'm making 1 purple and 1 pink. Right side down on these. If you hear funny noises in the background, my dog is really snoring. She is just having quite the nap over there. Once those are in place, we're going to stitch the seam. These are made just like we did the other blocks. You'll flip and press either at your iron or with your fingers or with a roller, whatever you'd like to do. I want to show you something really quick on the instructions. To keep me from messing up my fabric placement, I circled wherever I'm going to have the white fabric. I went ahead and took this over to my ironing board, gave it a good press. It's going to be easier since we're going to be building kind of around in a circle. It'll keep everything nice and neat. We're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. We want to trim this, and then we're going to grab our piece 3 fabric, which for me is going to be the white fabric. Got my white fabric, center it along that trimming and placement line, right side down, and then we're going to stitch the seam. You want to flip and press, and then we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. Sorry, I forgot to hit the button. I actually pressed it on the camera, but I guess I didn't press it hard enough. I just stitched out the next trimming and placement line right there. We're going to trim and get rid of this piece of fabric. Grab your piece 4, right side down, centered along that placement line, and then we'll stitch the seam, then flip, and then press. If you've been finger pressing, at this point you want to press it on your ironing board because we're going to stitch out a trimming and a tack down line that's going to go around this whole piece. So make sure you give it a good press. Both my pinwheel halves are pressed. Let's stitch the outside trimming guide. We want to trim what's on this side right here. Leave all of the rest because what we're going to do is make the other halves, and then we'll trim the center and we're going to sew them together. So all of this extra we're going to want to hang on to because we still have to do our quilting in the hoop. We're done with this side. We're moving on to piece number 5, which for me is right here. Right side up. Same thing we did here, just on the other side. Right side up, make sure you're covering that triangle, and then we're going to stitch out the first trimming and placement line. We want to trim off this part right here along the top. These are trimmed. We're on to piece number 6. Centered along the placement line, right side down. Then we're going to stitch the seam. Once you have these flipped and pressed, we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. We want to trim everything above that line. We're ready for piece number 7. Right side down, centered along that trimming and placement line. Then stitch the seam. Going to stitch our next trimming and placement line. Trim this piece of fabric. We've got our last piece, piece number 8. Right side down, centered along that line, and then you'll stitch the seam, flip, and you want to press this because we're going to stitch that outside line. I've got everything pressed. We're going to stitch the outside line. We want to trim the center fabric away just like we did on this side, and then we're going to head over to the table. We're going to trim these and set them up to stitch them together. I'm at the table. I want to go ahead and get this out of my hoop. Got this out of the hoop. I want to cut down the middle and just get these separated. First thing I want to do is clean up this line. We're going to be sewing the 2 halves together and then pressing them apart to make our pinwheel. There's a little bit of extra fabric there. I'm going to trim this. I'm going to put my ruler right on that line. Just want to get rid of that little bit extra and get rid of that stabilizer because we don't need the stabilizer in the seam. Nice and clean. I'm going to do that for all 4 of my blocks. Now we need to sew the halves together to create the pinwheel. If you flip them like this, you've got one right side up, one right side down. You can kind of see your stitching lines and then slide it up. That's an easy way to do that. Right side up, right side down. Can match up those stitching lines. Slide it straight up, add a couple clips. Going to take this to my machine and sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You've got a nice line right here. See that line of stitching? That's your 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can follow right along that line if you don't have a 1/4 inch guide foot. I sewed them together. Let's see how I did. Wow, that's the best looking pinwheel I think I've ever put together. Everything matches. That never happens. Let's see how I did on this one. See? Not quite so perfect, but good enough. It's a pillow. This one's a little off. I want to take these over to my ironing board and I want to press them open because we have a lot of bulk right here in the center. That's why I want to press these open. If you want to trim away the extra stabilizer, you can, but leave this fabric for now. It's going to help us when we go to do our quilting. We're going to pull our quilting files. In the instructions, it has these done in different colors. It looks like pinwheel 1 is in a blue and pinwheel 2 is in a gray. I'm doing both of mine in the same color. The reason I'm telling you this is because if you're duplicating them in your hoop, you may want to duplicate it differently, and I'll explain that. We need KDQ 491 Winter 11 4x4 design. There's one. We've talked about these keys before, but I'm going to go over them really quickly. There's the duplicate key and the border duplicate key. I tend to use the border duplicate key because however many you put on the screen, it works through everything at the same time. So for this one, I'll use the border duplicate key. I'm going to add a block. I need some space in between. And the minute I put enough space in between to allow me to work with my fabric, it bumps it to the biggest hoop. So I'm going to max out my space. Okay, so this is set. And I'm going to save that really quick, and I want to show you how this is going to stitch out. Everything happens twice. So my batting placement, batting tack down, fabric placement line, fabric tack down, and quilting. If I'm using 2 different colors of thread, I need to make sure to stop it after it quilts this one, cut the thread, change the thread, and let it quilt this one. Or when you duplicate, it's grayed out now, but if I didn't use this border duplicate and I used a regular duplicate key, what would happen is it would do this block start to finish, and then this block start to finish. So you could have one color thread and another color thread and not worry about stopping it between blocks. I'm going to quilt both of mine with the silvery gray. We're going to start with our batting placement line. Place your batting so it covers the batting placement line. tack it down and then trim everything outside of the tack down line. Next, we're going to stitch out the fabric placement lines. I'm going to take my hoop over to my table and we're going to get our pinwheels set up to quilt. I've got my fabric placement lines stitched out. We need to try and center our block. You could fold it in half and try and get the halfway point. What's probably fairly easy to do is if you fold a corner, you can see this outside line here of stitching, and then there's also an inside line of stitching. The inside line corresponds to the batting tack down. The outside corresponds to the fabric placement. So if you kind of line them up, like right now, let me zoom in. I have a little square because I lined this up with this line, this up with this line, and then this line of stitching is hitting this line. This line of stitching is hitting this line. I've got a square. Let me make that a little bit bigger. We'll match that up again. I'm going to fold it out. Now this should be centered. Let's fold this corner back. Line, line, line. Yep. I'll do that again if that didn't make sense. I'm going to put my tape on it, check the other corners. It looks pretty good. I'm going to add some tape. That's why you didn't want to trim this. If you trimmed this on the trimming line before this step, you would have to be adding your tape and trying to get it only 1/4 of an inch in, or you'd have to pick it out because it would do the fabric tack down and your tape would get stuck. It's probably hard to see on camera, but you can flip it over to the back and you can look at the stitching line and look for the stitching line on your block and see if everything's lining up. You'll probably be able to see that better in person. What's good about the quilting design they picked for this is nothing goes over the center. So all of this bulk you don't have to worry about. The quilting goes all the way around. I'm going to just set that down. Take this. What you can do is you've got a corner here and a corner here. This really is like math class. We're making equilateral triangle? No. Isosceles triangle? I can't remember. I'll have to look it up and put it on the screen. Half square triangle? What I'm doing is I'm folding it right here on that line. Now I'm going to take my 2 lines of stitching and line them up so I get squares. Stitching, 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 stitching. Got the batting line here, this line of thread here, batting line, this line of thread. I've got a square. And if you want, you can slowly roll it and get closer and closer, and your corners should match. I'm going to just hold this and I'm going to check this side. Before the background quilting stitches, we're going to stitch out a fabric tack down line. And if you look at where the needle is, it's going to stitch that tack down right around the outside. This is a good double check to see if your block is centered or not. So when you stitch this out, if it starts stitching and you're way off, you can stop, cut the thread, readjust your block, back up your machine, and stitch the tack down again. Let's start and see how I'm doing. That looks good. It hit right on the corner. Good enough. The quilting is done. Let's get this over to the table. I want to get this out of the hoop, take off the tape. These are really big pieces of tape. I want to save these so I can use them again. Then I'm going to separate my blocks. Got my rotating cutting mat, 4.5 inch square orange pop ruler. What I'm going to be looking at are these little arrows. See that arrow right there? In the center of each side is an arrow. I'm lining up the arrow with the center seam. Let me move that one that way a little bit. That looks good. And make sure that this arrow is on that seam. It is. And this arrow is on that seam. Double checking. The reason I'm not using the outside stitch lines is because they're a little bit off. My blocks weren't completely totally centered. You can use the outside stitch lines. It'll work, but since I know mine are crooked, I want to try to make sure that this part of the block is centered. I want them to look like pinwheels and not wonky pinwheels. So to the best of my ability, I'm using those arrows on these rulers to make sure it's centered. I always move them. I get it centered and then I put the outside one down and then it moves. We're going to trim all the way over as far as I can get it. I did show the orange pop rulers in previous videos. This is just a little bit different based on using the arrows for lining up. So be careful when you're trimming. And then I'll show you when I'm done. We'll see how centered I get this. 2 more sides, 1 and this side. Alright, let's take this out and have a look at it. I have a 4.5 inch square ruler. Let's look and see how close to center I got this. Looks good. Got it pretty well, perfectly centered. I'll go ahead and trim the second one off camera. Let's move on to making the snowman arms. For the snowman arms, I'm going to use a 5x7 hoop. You need to load wash away stabilizer for this. Let's bring up our file for the dimensional arms. It's just one file. We don't have to do anything special with it. Just load it onto your machine. We're good to go. If you're following the colors in the pattern, they're using the color Hickory. I'm using the brown that I used when I stitched out the Cocoa Cup in the first video. We're going to stitch out the arms placement line. I'm using the gingerbread color embroidery felt for this step. That's what I have in my stash. I'm going to cover those lines, and it does show adding a piece of tape. So we'll put a piece of tape here on the side, and then we're going to stitch the arms, tack down and trimming lines, but we're not going to trim it. The next thing we're going to do is take our hoop off the machine. We're going to turn it over to the back, and you're going to take your other piece of felt or whatever you're using, cover up those lines, and you want to add tape. I'm going to add tape going all the way around. Here's the back of my hoop. I have tape going all the way around, and then you're going to flip it to the front, and it tells you to tape it again. I've got a piece of tape here, here, and here. It says to do that to prevent the presser foot from catching. If you're going to match your bobbin thread, change out your bobbin for this step, matching your bobbin thread to the top thread. I'm not going to. I'm just going to go for it, and then you can see what mine looks like and decide if you want to do the matching bobbin thread. We're going to stitch the arms, tack down lines. We're done here. If you changed your bobbin thread, change it back to the regular thread. Let's take this over to the table. You want to take off your tape, front and back. After you've got your tape off, go ahead and get the project out of your hoop. And it says to trim it on the trimming lines, and then it's a raw edge finish. So I'll be trimming right on top of these lines here. There's a lot of extra stabilizer. I'm going to get that out of the way first. Grab a good pair of sharp scissors to do the trimming for this, and you want to make sure you hold the back in place. This is what the back of mine looks like because I didn't change my bobbin thread, but when this goes on the pillow, this is what you're going to see. That's why I'm not worried about it. Grab a nice sharp pair of scissors. I have these Karen K Buckley scissors. They're really sharp. It says just to trim right on the line, so take your time, go around both the arms and trim. There's the first arm. I'm going to do the second one off camera. Once you're done trimming, you can either put the whole thing in water, or you can take a wet cotton swab and run it along the seam here. You see the stabilizer, that little bit of white? That will make that stabilizer disappear. I'm going to trim this one off camera. We're going to move on to the lace snowflake. You're going to need your wash away stabilizer again. We're going to use 2 layers. I'll be using an 8x12 hoop. I'm going to do all 3 at once. I'll be using white thread, and there's white thread in my bobbin, so when it talks about a matching bobbin thread, white and white, close enough. I'm not going to change and wrap this around my bobbin. I'm going to go with my regular white bobbin thread. And this says to use a 70-10 needle. I mentioned that at the beginning. I don't have a 70-10 needle. I'm going to go ahead and put on a 75-11, a brand new needle, and we'll see if that works out okay. I'm going to put in 2 layers of my wash away, hand tighten, screwdriver tighten, and head over to the machine. Let's load the file for the snowflake. This will be interesting. I've never done this before. They call it lace work. Hopefully it works. I don't have the right needle. But we're going to do it anyway. We're going to add 1, and I'm going to add a couple of more. I've got 3. Let's spread them out just a little bit, and they should fit in my 8x12 hoop. I'll save it to my machine anyway, just in case. I'm going to hit embroidery. I'm going to lower my presser foot, and my light turned green, so I'm good with my 8x12 hoop. 2 layers of wash away stabilizer. Make sure you have your wash away stabilizer. Make sure it's nice and tight in your hoop, that you've screwdriver tightened your hoop. You don't want this to pop off. I have the 7511 regular needle on my machine. We'll see if it works out. This is just one step. It's going to stitch. While it's stitching, holy smokes, it says it's going to take 33 minutes. Wow, okay, so I guess it's about 11 minutes per snowflake, and it does say match your bobbin thread to your top thread. I'm using my regular white bobbin. I have white thread. I'm going to get a little cotton swab here, get it wet, and sit here and dissolve this stabilizer while this is stitching out. It says a 33-minute stitch out. What I'll probably do is just record one. My snowflakes are all done. If you changed your bobbin thread, make sure you change it back to the regular thread. You want to take it out of your hoop, trim around it, and then we're going to remove the water-soluble stabilizer. It says to do that by soaking it in cool water for 20 seconds. I'm going to do that off camera in the kitchen. I'm going to get a bowl and fill it with cool water and then put the snowflakes in the bowl. When this stuff dissolves, it gets kind of gooey and it can clog up the pipes. So if you keep it in a bowl when you're done, then you can just dump the water outside rather than having it go down your drain. I'm going to do that, and then we'll come back and see what they look like. Here's my snowflakes. I didn't change the bobbin thread. I used a regular white bobbin thread. I used a 7511 needle. They look fine to me. I have a few loose threads that I need to trim. You can see there's a couple threads sticking out, but I'm going to let them dry. They're wet. I just did the water soluble stabilizer treatment, soak them for about 20 seconds. I think I may press them under a pressing cloth. I'm going to want mine to lie flat. If you want them to curve, when they're damp, you can bend it like that so it'll be curvy. I think they came out fine. If you use a 70-10 needle, if it makes a difference, let me know. Leave me a comment. Let's look at what we made today and talk about what we're going to do next time. We've got our 4 snowball blocks, 2 pinwheel blocks, the little arms, and I did go through and dissolve the embroidery stabilizer while the snowflakes were stitching out. I used regular white bobbin thread on these, so that's what the back of mine looks like, but I'm okay with that because you're only going to see the front when it's on a pillow, and the snowflakes. Next time we're going to make our borders and our filler blocks and sew everything together, then we'll be done. So don't miss part 4. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Once we're done making the Let It Snow pillow, we're going to move on to the Snow Place tiling scene. This is in the Feeling Festive Bella box. It is available now as a digital download. I'll link that below. I already have everything cut and ready to go for this. And as we move into the new year, I will be starting the Applique of the Month Club. This is a subscription from Kimberbell, Me Time Delivered. I'll link that below. We're going to make a table runner every month, and then I'll be bringing you Hoop Studio, Perfectly Pieced, and we're going to have a stitch along for Sweetheart Street. This is the Sweetheart Street bench pillow. I have my embellishment kit. I have the fabric kit. I've already come up with the schedule, so I'll announce that at the end of part 4 for this. I'll get the schedule on the website as well, so you can get all your stuff prepared for Sweetheart Street. Thank you for making the Kimberbell Let It Snow pillow with me. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below the video. I do have a new Facebook group. That'll be below the video as well. You do have to answer one security question. That just helps keep out the spammers. I look at it a couple times a day, so if it takes a little bit of time to get approved, that's because I'm the only one who's looking at it. If there's any projects you'd like to see in 2026, let me know. Drop me a comment, and I will see you next time.